Okay, so here's the points. That's the movable arm with the movable point. This is the stationary point. This is a condenser, distributor cam or point cam. This is the lock screw or the hold down screw. This right here is the eccentric screw. The eccentric screw is what you use to adjust the point gap. Removing the lock screw. I don't have the right size ignition wrench. I need 11/32 right here. So I have to use this little ratchet. Disconnect the condenser and disconnect the primary lead. Put the new points in. This pivot pin right here is permanently attached to the breaker plate. You want to make sure the breaker plate is clean. No debris that would keep the points from laying down flat. So I tighten down the hold down screw and then I back it off just a little bit so that it's barely snug down on the stationary point so that the eccentric can open and close the point gap. And now I'm going to bump the starter motor. That'll rotate the distributor cam until the rubbing block is on one of the high spots of one of the 8 cam lobes. And you'll notice the cam is rotating counterclockwise. Alright, now the rubbing block is on one of the high points of the cam. So that's where I adjust the points. So I've used the eccentric and I open the points up, obviously too wide, but I do that so I can just lay my feeler gauge in there. Now I use the eccentric to lightly close the gap until the points actually clamp onto the feeler gauge very lightly. And I want to feel a very light drag. And then I tighten down the lock screw. And then I want to feel that light drag. And when I pull the feeler gauge out from between the points, I want to keep an eye on the movable point, and I want to watch for no movement when I pull the feeler gauge out from between them. I don't want to see any movement on this movable arm. That looked good. Okay. And now I'll go ahead and tighten down the lock screw. And always recheck. Watch that movable arm, make sure it doesn't try to close up. Okay, I saw no movement at all. So now I reattach the condenser lead and the primary circuit lead. Okay, I got a good connection. I make sure there's no bare spots on the wires that would cause a short. And I make sure the wires are not broken. Now I have replaced this condenser. That's a new condenser. So now I've got a new condenser, new set of points. Points are gapped to 16 thousandths. I also have a new rotor, and the rotor has a little, like a plastic key in it, and it goes in this slot in the top of the distributor shaft. If you put it on there, put the rotor on there, just rotate it until it drops down in the keyway. Alright, and then put the distributor cap back on. The distributor cap also has a keyway, little plastic key that fits in this slot right here. And that slot also aligns with the spring clip that holds the cap on. So the spring clips that hold the cap on are kind of difficult to put back on. What I do is I put the cap on, try to rotate it so I know that the keyway is in the slot, and then I tilt the cap forward, and it makes it a little easier to pop the spring clip on the front. Now I try to rotate the cap, and I can't rotate it because the keyway keeps it from rotating. Then to get the back clip on, it's a little difficult, so I use a screwdriver. I'm going to go down and I'm going to put the clip right about here, and I'm going to grip the screwdriver and pull the screwdriver to snap the spring clip on. Get it down below on the lower third of the spring clip and pull it towards you. And it's as easy as that. Try to rotate the cap to make sure that that keyway stayed in place, and that should be good to go right there. Okay, so I'm going to need to idle the engine at about 400 RPM, and you do it with that screw right there. That is the idle bypass air screw right here. It's on the left-hand side of the Rochester, and that's in 1955 and later models. 1954 used the idle stop screw on the accelerator linkage that slightly opened the throttle plates to adjust your idle. This system here leaves the throttle plates completely shut and uses manifold vacuum to adjust your idle speed. And I've rebuilt this carburetor, but it's been a while ago. You can see the throttle body's already rusted because I didn't paint it, unfortunately, and I didn't put any kind of sealer on it. So I'll probably wind up doing that over again. So for now, I just want to set the idle bypass air screw to the initial startup position, which is about 2.5 turns out. So first I gotta turn it all the way until it's seated. And then back it out 2.5 turns. Alright, that should be good to go right there. So I'm going to go to the 2 idle mixture screws and set them to their initial startup position. First I'm going to turn them all the way in till they seat lightly. I'm going to back it out 1/2, 1, 1/2, and I'm going for 2 full turns out. The 55 manual says two turns. Again, tighten it up into the seat lightly, back it out 1/2, 1, 1/2, and 2. And that ought to get us in pretty good shape. Shouldn't get it started. Then just want to do a little visual check for obvious problems like vacuum leaks. This line goes to your vacuum advance on your distributor. This vacuum line disappears under the intake manifold, comes up back here and feeds this little distribution block, and that's feeding the windshield wipers, and I can see that rubber hose is not pushed on all the way. That's a potential vacuum leak. And then you got this big vacuum line that goes over to your power brake booster. These old rubber hoses are prone to crack and break and cause vacuum leaks, and that'll be a problem when you try to adjust your carburetor. Okay, so the engine's ready to start now, so the next thing I need to do is to check the dwell angle to make sure that when I gap the points, it's giving me the correct dwell time. And the carburetor's only set up for an initial startup, so I won't be able to idle it down to where it will eventually be, but as long as it'll run steady and relatively smooth between 500 and 1000 RPM, I should be able to get an accurate measurement of the dwell. Here we go. checking the dwell. So the dwell was within spec. On this engine, the spec is 26 to 33 degrees, and the dwell angle is within spec, but it's in the upper range, and I don't really like that because as the rubbing block on the points wears out, the gap becomes smaller, and as the gap becomes smaller, the dwell angle increases. So since it's already in the top of the range now, it wouldn't take very long for the dwell angle to increase and become out of spec. So I'm going to re-gap the points. It'll only take a minute, and see if I can bring that dwell angle down a little bit. Okay, that's a little better. So 29 is right in the middle of the range, which is exactly where I want it to be. And I wound up gapping the points at 17 thousandths instead of 16 thousandths like the shop manual said, in order to get that 29 degrees of dwell time. So with the dwell set, I'll adjust the ignition timing with the timing light. Disconnecting the vacuum advance now. A lot of times this is a rubber hose and it's easy enough to disconnect it at the distributor, but this one happens to be hard piped all the way from the vacuum source, and it's easier to disconnect it here at the carburetor. And then of course after you disconnect the tubing, you need to block off the vacuum right there. When you start the engine, the vacuum will pull on this and seal it good. And to retard or advance the spark, you need to turn the distributor, and you do that by loosening this nut that loosens up on the hold down clamp, and you want to loosen it just enough so that the distributor can be turned by hand, but with some resistance. Okay, so right there is the pointer that's stationary attached to the engine, and right here on the vibration damper is the timing marks. I put a little bit of chalk on them and wipe that chalk back off so that I can see them a little more clearly when I put the timing light on them. So hook the timing light up to your number 1 spark plug wire. On the Cadillac here, it's on the driver's side. Adjusting the idle down using the idle air bypass screw. Trying to idle. Okay, so the timing's off a little bit. Not much, not too bad, but it's about maybe 3 degrees retarded. So like I mentioned before, I gotta adjust it, and to adjust it, I need to turn the distributor. So I'm gonna loosen the hold down clamp, which I've already loosened. And then I'm gonna just snug it back down. I just want the distributor loose enough so that I can turn it by hand with some light resistance while the engine's running. So I put a little bit of white paint on the pointer and the timing mark on the balancer. I didn't bother with the A or the C. They're not that important. I'm just interested in the timing mark in between the A and the C. That's what's supposed to line up with the pointer for initial timing at idle. Hopefully I'll be able to see that better. So that's going to be it for the tune-up video. Didn't get it to idle down where I needed it to, but I got it low enough that the mechanical advance was not activated. The curve comes in around 900 RPM on this engine, and I had it down to right around 600-ish RPM. I'll do another video on checking the compression and show you why the vacuum was so bad. This engine's like got less than 10 inches of vacuum, and it should have twice that. It should have 20 inches of vacuum. But that'll be another video.